You can't be serious, Xerlach chittered, his mandibles clicking in what the humans had learned to recognize as their species' equivalent of an eye roll. They're putting a human in charge of our defensive operations? Not just any human, Vina corrected, her forearms gesturing in synchronized exasperation. They're putting Sergeant Sarah Chen in charge. The mess hall of Outpost Delta 7 fell silent for approximately 2 seconds before erupting into a cacophony of alien expletives, concerned warbles, and one very distinct "oh shit" from the Andromedian in the corner who had picked up human cursing with disturbing enthusiasm. I should probably explain a few things here. First off, hi, I'm Private First Class Michael Torres, and I'm one of exactly 3 humans stationed at this particular outpost of the Galactic Defense Force. Well, 4 now, counting Sergeant Chen. And second, the reason everyone's losing their collective extraterrestrial minds is that humans have a bit of a reputation. See, we're new to the whole galactic community thing. Earth only got invited to the party about 15 years ago, when one of our deep space probes accidentally punched through a dimensional barrier it absolutely shouldn't have been able to penetrate. The general consensus among the more established species was that this was perfectly on brand for humans, accidentally achieving something impossible because nobody told us it was impossible in the first place. But the regulations clearly state. Xerlach started to protest, before being cut off by Vina's primary right hand raised in the universal stop gesture. Some things really are constant across species. The regulations state that command positions must be filled by the most qualified individual available, she said, all 4 of her eyes narrowing. And after what happened in the Proxima incident... Ah yes, the Proxima incident. That's probably worth explaining too. 6 months ago, a routine patrol near Proxima Centauri went sideways when they encountered a Harvester scout ship. The Harvesters, for those fortunate enough not to know, are basically space locusts with FTL drives and a serious attitude problem. They're also supposedly extinct, which made their appearance something of an unwelcome surprise. The patrol consisted of 2 ships, a standard GDF cruiser, and a smaller human vessel that was tagging along as part of our integration program. The cruiser's captain, following standard protocol, attempted to initiate diplomatic contact. This was, technically speaking, the correct procedure. Sarah Chen, then a junior officer on the human vessel, had a different approach. While the cruiser was still trying to establish communications, she commandeered a maintenance pod, loaded it with mining explosives, and manually piloted it into the Harvester ship's equivalent of an exhaust port. When questioned later about this blatant violation of about 16 different protocols, she simply shrugged and said, "I watched Star Wars." The resulting investigation concluded 3 things. 1. Officer Chen had violated numerous regulations and standard operating procedures. 2. Her actions had single-handedly prevented the Harvesters from alerting their main fleet. 3. This was somehow the least crazy thing a human had done in similar circumstances. "I heard," whispered to Clara, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with gossip-worthy excitement, "that during her command assessment, she proposed using black holes as tactical weapons." "That's ridiculous," Xerlach scoffed. "Even humans wouldn't be that..." He trailed off, mandibles twitching uncertainly. Would they? I couldn't help but grin. Actually, that's not even the craziest part of her proposal. She wanted to use the black holes to create a makeshift FTL communication system by exploiting quantum entanglement across event horizons. The mess hall erupted in another round of chittering, warbling, and various other species-specific expressions of disbelief. I took a bite of my synthetic protein bar, still better than MREs, and enjoyed the show. The thing about humans that our alien colleagues have never quite figured out is that we're simultaneously the most rational and most absurd species in the galaxy. We're the only known civilization that developed both nuclear physics and cat memes. We created spacecraft capable of interstellar travel and then named them things like Bodie McBoatface 2, Space Edition. But surely the Command Council wouldn't... Xerlach's protest was cut short by the station's intercom system crackling to life. "Attention all personnel," came the calm, professional voice of our new commanding officer. "This is Sergeant Chen. I'd like everyone to report to the main hangar in 15 minutes for a brief introduction and overview of some proposed operational changes. Also, if anyone knows where I can find about 50 tons of antimatter and a really big rubber band, please see me after the briefing. Chen out." The mess hall went dead silent again. I counted to 3 before the chaos erupted. "She's joking," Vina said, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. "She has to be joking, right?" I finished my protein bar and stood up. Fun fact, humans actually invented something called a space fountain that works kind of like what she's suggesting. It uses synchronized particle beams instead of a rubber band. but the principle is similar. The looks of horror on their faces were priceless. "Oh, come on," I said, grinning. "It's not like she's suggesting we weaponize zero-point energy fluctuations or anything crazy like that." The horrified expressions intensified. I decided not to mention that I'd actually seen that particular proposal in her personnel file. As we filed out of the mess hall toward the main hangar, I couldn't help but reflect on how we'd gotten here. Humanity had spent centuries imagining what first contact would be like, creating countless stories about our place in a larger galactic community. We'd pictured ourselves as everything from conquering warriors to peaceful diplomats to bumbling newcomers. The reality turned out to be both simpler and more complicated. We're the galaxy's wildcards. The species that looks at the impossible and says, "Hold my beer." The ones who come up with solutions so crazy they loop around to brilliant. The main hangar was already half full when we arrived. Sergeant Chen stood on a makeshift platform, actually a repurposed cargo container, surveying the assembled crowd with an expression that somehow managed to be both professional and slightly mischievous. I'd met her briefly during the Proxima incident investigation, and one thing had stuck with me. She had this way of making the utterly insane sound completely reasonable. It was a particularly human talent, and she'd elevated it to an art form. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began once we'd all assembled. "First, I want to address the rumors about the antimatter and rubber band. That was a joke." There was a collective sigh of relief. "We're actually going to use quantum filaments instead of a rubber band. Much more efficient." I watched as several of our alien colleagues tried to decide if she was joking this time. The beauty of it was, with humans, you could never be entirely sure. Now, I've reviewed our current defensive protocols, and while they're technically adequate, I think we can do better. I've prepared a presentation outlining some proposed changes. Lieutenant Vina, if you could dim the lights. What followed was either the most brilliant or most terrifying military presentation in galactic history, depending on your species and tolerance for human creativity. Sergeant Chen outlined a defensive strategy that involved, among other things, repurposing the station's waste recycling system as a makeshift mass driver, training the maintenance drones for guerrilla warfare, something she called tactical applications of chaos theory, that made our chief physicist cry, a completely redesigned alert system based on cat memes. The really scary part? It all made perfect sense. "Any questions?" she asked after concluding her presentation. Exerlac raised a trembling appendage. "Sergeant, with all due respect, these proposals are unprecedented." "Thank you," Chen replied with a smile that suggested she was taking it as a compliment, which, being human, she probably was. "But they violate at least 27 different regulatory guidelines." "Actually," she corrected, "they work entirely within existing regulations. They just interpret them creatively." This, I realized, was why the Command Council had put her in charge. It wasn't despite her being human. It was because of it. In a galaxy full of species that had developed along logical, predictable lines, humanity's particular brand of controlled chaos was a secret weapon. "Now," Chen continued, "I know change can be uncomfortable. But consider this. The galaxy is changing. The harvesters aren't as extinct as we thought. The drift clans are getting bolder. We need to adapt, to think differently." She paused, looking each of us in the eye. Optical sensor, or sensory cluster, and different is what humans do best. I watched as her words sank in. Across the hangar, expressions and postures shifted from skepticism to thoughtful consideration. Even Zerlak's mandibles had stopped their anxious clicking. "Besides," she added with a grin, "wait until you see what I have planned for the annual station inspection. Did you know humans invented something called glitter bombs?" The next few months were interesting. Sergeant Chen's creative interpretations of standard procedures turned out to be surprisingly effective. Our response times improved by 300%. Our defensive capabilities, despite now partially relying on weaponized cleaning supplies, were rated among the best in the sector. And when the harvesters did show up again, well, let's just say they weren't prepared for a defense strategy that included gravitationally slingshotting asteroids, reprogrammed maintenance bots performing synchronized attack patterns, and yes, actually using a quantum filament array as a giant space slingshot. The after-action report described it as unconventional but effective. The unofficial version, spreading through GDF channels, called it pure human chaos energy. Both were accurate. Looking back now, I think that's what humanity really brings to the galaxy. Not superior technology or advanced civilization or any of the things we thought first contact would be about. We bring the ability to look at the impossible and say, why not? To take the rational and add just enough irrational to make magic happen. You know what the really crazy part is? I overheard Zerlak saying to Vina in the mess hall, exactly 1 year after Chen took command. I'm starting to think like them. Yesterday, I caught myself wondering if we could use the station's artificial gravity to create a temporary black hole. Could we? Vina asked, trying and failing to sound merely professionally curious. Actually, came Sergeant Chen's voice from behind them, making both aliens jump. That's phase 2 of our defensive upgrades. But first, who wants to help me test these glitter bombs? And that, really, is the story of how humanity found its place in the galaxy. Not as conquerors or diplomats or even bumbling newcomers, but as the species that makes everyone else say, "You can't be serious," right before we prove that yes, we absolutely can. Oh, and about those glitter bombs? Turns out they're surprisingly effective against harvester sensor arrays. Something about the reflective properties of the particles causing cascade failures in their optical systems. Who knew, right? Well, Sergeant Chen did. Because of course she did. She's human after all, and that's exactly why they put her in charge. Glitter, announced Chief Inspector Varnthak, holding up a crystalline data pad covered in a fine, iridescent powder, is not an acceptable defense mechanism. With all due respect, sir, Sergeant Chen replied, maintaining an admirably straight face. The test results suggest otherwise. I should probably explain how we got here. Remember when Chen mentioned something about glitter bombs and the annual station inspection? Well, it turns out she wasn't joking. But then again, she rarely is. It's just that her serious ideas sound like jokes to most species. It had started 3 days ago when the inspection team arrived. Usually, these inspections are pretty straightforward. Check the systems, review the protocols, make sure nobody's accidentally created a singularity in the maintenance bay. Again. But of course, nothing is ever straightforward when humans are involved. Torres, Chen had called me into her office the day before the inspectors arrived. How do you feel about a little chaos? I'd learned that when Chen asks this question, the correct answer is always, how much chaos are we talking about, and do I need to update my will? She'd grinned, that particular human grin that makes our alien colleagues nervous. Remember how the Command Council said we needed to demonstrate our innovative defensive capabilities during this inspection? Yes, ma'am, I replied, already both dreading and looking forward to whatever was coming next. Well, I've been thinking about psychological warfare. And that's how Operation Sparkle Storm was born. The inspection team consisted of 3 members. Chief Inspector Varnthak, a Rigelian known for his by-the-book approach. Lieutenant Commander Zix, a Centaurian with a notorious lack of humor. And Dr. Katal, an Andromedian weapons specialist who, thankfully, had worked with humans before. Your defensive modifications, Varnthak was saying now, still trying to brush glitter off his datapad. While effective, represent a significant departure from standard protocols. Actually, Chen countered, pulling out her own datapad. If you'll reference Section 47, subsection Delta of the Defense Protocol Guidelines, it specifically states that stations must maintain capability for non-lethal countermeasures including, but not limited to, sensory disruption systems. I don't believe the authors of that regulation had craft supplies in mind, Sergeant. The regulation doesn't specify what can't be used, only what must be achieved, and our tests show a 98% effectiveness rate at disrupting hostile sensor systems. Chen's smile widened slightly. Plus, it's biodegradable. I watched as Varnthak's facial tentacles twitched in what I'd learned to recognize as suppressed frustration. Next to him, Lieutenant Commander Zix was still trying to restore functionality to their optical sensors after getting caught in the demonstration's fallout. Dr. Katal, on the other hand, was taking notes with disturbing enthusiasm. Fascinating, they muttered. The reflective properties combined with the irregular particle size creates a cascading interference pattern that... Sergeant, have you considered adding a static charge to enhance dispersal? Funny you should ask, Chen replied, and I knew we'd won at least one convert. The thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy still struggles to understand is that we don't just think outside the box. We question why there needs to be a box in the first place. Then we usually turn the box into something else entirely, like a tactical delivery system for sparkly chaos. Perhaps, Varnthak said with the air of someone trying very hard to maintain their composure. We should move on to reviewing your other innovations. Of course, Chen agreed cheerfully. Would you like to see the zero-point energy fluctuation cannons next, or should we start with the quantum-entangled coffee makers? I watched as all 3 inspectors froze. The what? Zix asked, their translator struggling to process the concept. Oh, that's just what we call them, Chen explained. Technically, they're probability manipulation devices utilizing quantum uncertainty principles to enable faster-than-light beverage preparation. You weaponized coffee makers? Varnthak's facial tentacles were now doing that spiral thing that indicated either deep confusion or impending nervous breakdown. Not weaponized, Chen corrected. Optimized. Although there was that one time with the Harvester scout ship. She trailed off, leaving the inspectors to imagine exactly what a human might do with a weaponized coffee maker. Based on their expressions, their imaginations were working overtime. The rest of the inspection went about as well as you'd expect when you have a human commander showing alien bureaucrats how she's completely reimagined standard operating procedures while technically staying within regulations. They saw the maintenance drone ballet, aka synchronized combat droids. The repurposed waste recycling system, now a highly effective mass driver. The station's new alert system, still based on cat memes, now with added tactical annotations. And of course, the infamous quantum filament slingshot. By the end of the day, Varnthak looked like he needed a drink. Zix had given up trying to make sense of anything, and Dr. Katal had filled 3 data pads with notes and was asking about transfer possibilities. I feel compelled to point out, Varnthak said during the final briefing, that while your methods are unprecedented, the results are undeniable. Your station's defense ratings are the highest in the sector. Thank you, sir, Chen replied modestly. However, he continued, I must insist that you add appropriate warning labels to the coffee makers. Already done, sir. In 17 languages, including interpretive dance for the Harmonious Collective. I'm pretty sure I saw one of Varnthak's facial tentacles twitch in what might have been a suppressed smile. As the inspection team prepared to leave, Dr. Katal pulled Chen aside. Sergeant, about that glitter dispersal system. Have you considered adding audio components? Perhaps something the humans call death metal? I like the way you think, Doctor, Chen replied. Did you know humans once tested using heavy metal music as a crowd control method? I made a mental note to update my will. After the inspectors left, the station crew gathered in the mess hall for what had become a traditional post-inspection debrief. Which is a fancy way of saying we all got together to process what new form of controlled chaos Chen had introduced to the galaxy this time. I still can't believe they approved the glitter bombs. Xerlach chittered, his mandibles clicking in amazement. Approved? Vina laughed with all 4 arms gesturing expressively. Did you see Dr. Katal's notes? They're probably going to make them standard issue. The galaxy's not ready for standardized glitter bombs, I said, then paused. Actually, the galaxy's probably not ready for humans in general, but they're stuck with us now. You know what the really amazing part is? Takalara's bioluminescent patches pulsed thoughtfully. Everything she does is technically within regulations. It's like she found all these loopholes we never knew existed. Not loopholes, Chen said, appearing behind us with her quantum coffee maker. Standard issue, probably not weaponized. Creative compliance, there's a difference. Is there? Xerlach asked skeptically. Of course. Loopholes are what you use when you want to break rules. Creative compliance is what you use when you want to show why the rules need to evolve. She took a sip of her coffee, which may or may not have briefly violated several laws of physics. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy isn't our technology, or our fighting spirit, or even our glitter bombs. It's our ability to look at the way things have always been done and ask, but what if we did it differently? Looking around the mess hall at our mixed crew of humans and aliens, I could see her point. We'd changed how the galaxy thought about everything from defense protocols to beverage preparation. We'd taken their carefully ordered universe and added just enough chaos to make it more interesting. So, Chen continued with that familiar glint in her eye, who wants to help me test Dr. Katal's sonic warfare suggestion? I've got some Metallica queued up. Across the mess hall, expressions ranged from horror to curiosity to resignation. But nobody left. Because that's another thing about humans. We may be crazy, but we make life interesting. And in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations and established protocols, maybe that's exactly what was needed. A species crazy enough to think outside the box, weaponize office supplies, and turn coffee makers into probability manipulation devices. As I watched Chen start explaining the tactical applications of heavy metal music to an increasingly fascinated Dr. Katal, who had apparently decided to stay, I couldn't help but smile. The galaxy might not be ready for humans, but it was definitely going to be more interesting with us around. And if that means occasionally getting caught in a cloud of tactical glitter, well, that's just part of the human experience now. Besides, as Chen likes to say, if your enemies are going to defeat you, they should at least have to do it while sparkling. Let me get this straight, Sergeant Chen said. reviewing the message from command with an expression that suggested either deep thought or mild indigestion. They want us to host an exchange program? After the legendary inspection incident, now known throughout the sector as the Glitter Protocol, someone in the Galactic Defense Force's High Command had apparently decided that our outpost's unique approach to problem-solving should be shared with other species. Because obviously the best response to discovering humans can weaponize craft supplies is to actively spread this knowledge across the galaxy. I'm Private First Class Torres, by the way, still here and still watching humanity's particular brand of chaos spread through the cosmos like a particularly enthusiastic virus. Correct, Vina confirmed, all four arms clutching data pads showing various parts of the official directive. We're to host officers from 6 different species for a 3-month training program in, let me quote this exactly, innovative tactical thinking and unconventional problem-solving methodologies. They want us to teach other species how to think like humans. Zerlak's mandibles did that thing they do when he's trying not to laugh. Is that even possible? More importantly, Chen mused, is it responsible? We all took a moment to consider the implications of actively teaching other species to embrace humanity's particular flavor of controlled chaos. The galaxy had barely survived discovering our existence in the first place. Well, Chen finally said with that familiar gleam in her eye, if they want to learn how humans think, we should give them the full experience. Torres, how's your singing voice? I felt a chill run down my spine. Ma'am? I've been thinking about educational methodologies. Did you know that humans used to have something called summer camp? And that's how Operation Kumbaya began. The exchange officers arrived a week later. We had Lieutenant Zarik from the Silicon Collective. Imagine a sentient crystal with anxiety issues. Commander Weath of the Harmonious Collective. Basically a floating jellyfish that communicates through interpretive dance. Captain NX-427 of the Machine Empire. A synthetic being who took everything literally. Major Crix from the warrior clans. Think, honor-bound space lizard. Science Officer Prima of the Hive Mind Convergence. A telepathic insectoid who kept accidentally broadcasting their confusion. And Dr. Wavelength of the Energy Beings. Exactly what it sounds like. Their first day began with what Chen called trust-building exercises, but what any honest human would recognize as controlled mayhem designed to break down inhibitions about normal behavior. The purpose of this exercise, Chen explained to the assembled officers, who were all wearing hastily modified human camp t-shirts, yes, even the energy being, is to work together to cross this obstacle course while singing Earth songs and carrying this egg. Query. Captain NX-427's metallic voice chimed. Why must we transport an unfertilized avian reproductive vessel while producing rhythmic sound patterns? Because, Chen replied with absolute seriousness, it builds character. I watched as confusion rippled through the group. Prima was broadcasting their bewilderment so strongly that several crew members developed headaches. But Lieutenant Zurich's crystalline structure vibrated with uncertainty. How does this relate to military tactics? Chen's smile should have come with a warning label. Everything humans do relates to tactics. You just have to figure out how. Commander Yeath's tentacles formed what I'm pretty sure was the interpretive dance equivalent of WTF. What followed was either the greatest breakthrough in interspecies relations or the most elaborate practical joke ever played on the galaxy's military elite. Possibly both. The obstacle course itself was a masterpiece of human chaos theory in action. It included a 3-legged race section, particularly challenging for species with no legs, a trust fall station. Energy beings have trust issues, apparently. Something Chen called the human knot, that nearly caused an interstellar incident, and a mandatory karaoke checkpoint, all while carrying an egg and singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat in rounds. This is undignified, Major Crix growled as they attempted to coordinate with Dr. Wavelength on the 3-legged race portion. Exactly, Chen beamed. Now you're getting it. The really weird part? It actually worked. By the end of the first week, we had a silicon being leading sing-alongs in the mess hall, a Machine Empire captain trying to understand the tactical applications of duck, duck, goose, and a warrior clan major who had become oddly competitive about friendship bracelet weaving. I do not understand, Captain NX-427 said during one of our debriefing sessions. How does manufacturing decorative wrist attachments enhance combat effectiveness? It's not about the bracelets, Chen explained patiently. It's about learning to think differently. When was the last time you approached a problem without immediately running a standard tactical analysis? I cannot compute such a scenario. Exactly. But now you're sitting here making friendship bracelets and trying to understand why. You're questioning your standard protocols. That's the first step to thinking like a human. Prima broadcast a moment of sudden clarity so strong it made everyone in the room sneeze. The training continued, each day bringing new exercises that seemed completely ridiculous on the surface, but somehow contained deeper lessons about human thinking. Capture the flag, with modified rules for non-corporeal beings. Improv comedy sessions. The Machine Empire's attempt at yes and became a station classic. Something Chen called red light, green light, that taught more about human psychology than any formal study ever could. But it wasn't until the Harvester incident that everything really clicked. We were halfway through a session on the tactical applications of pillow fights when the alert system activated. Thanks to Chen's modifications, this meant every screen on the station started displaying a picture of a grumpy cat with the caption, "Real shit happening RN." A Harvester scout ship had appeared at the edge of our sensor range. Standard protocol called for immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel and deployment of defensive systems. Instead, Chen turned to the exchange officers and said, "Pop quiz everyone. Show me what you've learned about thinking like a human." What followed was either the most brilliant or most terrifying display of tactical innovation the galaxy had ever seen. Possibly both. Lieutenant Zurich suggested using their crystalline structure to refract our communication beams, creating a sensor ghost that made it look like we had an entire fleet. Commander Wyeth choreographed the maintenance drones into such a complex dance pattern that the Harvester's targeting systems crashed trying to predict their movement. Captain NX-427 reprogrammed our waste recycling system to launch what they called tactical garbage with terrifying precision. Major Crix. Well, nobody's quite sure what Major Crix did with those friendship bracelets, but 3 of the Harvester's weapon systems spontaneously shut down. Prima coordinated it all by broadcasting tactical updates directly into everyone's minds, along with their growing excitement about finally understanding human chaos theory. And Dr. Wavelength. Let's just say we now know that energy beings can, in fact, possess and operate quantum coffee makers. The results were spectacular. The Harvester ship retreated so fast it left scorch marks in space-time. "Congratulations," Chen said afterward, beaming like a proud parent. "You've all just graduated from Human Tactics 101. How does it feel?" "Disturbing," Major Crix admitted. "But also exhilarating?" "Query," Captain X-427 interjected. "Was the purpose of the recreational activities truly to prepare us for combat situations?" "Not exactly," Chen replied. "The purpose was to teach you to stop looking for purpose and start looking for possibilities. Humans don't win because we have better technology or stronger weapons. We win because we're willing to try things that make no sense until they do." "Like using friendship bracelets as weapons?" Lieutenant Zurich's crystal structure sparkled with amusement. "Exactly like that. The galaxy is full of species that developed logical, orderly ways of thinking. But sometimes you need a species that looked at the laws of physics and said, maybe more of a guideline, really." Prima broadcast a thought that made everyone laugh, even though it was technically impossible to translate into any known language. As our exchange officers prepared to return to their respective commands, each armed with new perspectives and probably too much knowledge about human crafting supplies, I couldn't help but wonder what we'd actually achieved here. We'd taught 6 officers from 6 different species to think more like humans. They'd returned to their posts carrying not just tactical knowledge, but also friendship bracelets, camp songs, and the dangerous understanding that sometimes the best solution is the one that makes the least sense. "You realize," I said to Chen as we watched them leave, "that we might have just fundamentally altered the course of galactic military doctrine?" "Yup," she replied, sipping from her quantum coffee maker. "But think of it this way. The next time the Harvesters show up, they're going to have to deal with an entire galaxy that knows how to weaponize fun." She had a point. The galaxy might not be ready for human tactical thinking to spread, but it was happening anyway. Like glitter after a bomb test, there was no containing it now. "Besides," Chen added with that familiar grin, "wait until they see what I have planned for the advanced course. Ever heard of paintball?" I made a mental note to update my will. Again.